when Paul couldn't present, I had a slideshow I'd put together earlier this year that I volunteered to show, and I don't have any text written for it. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the shipwrecks in each picture. As Dave pointed at, there's three bodies of water that meet in the Outer Banks. The northern waters, which sometimes they call it the Northern Bight, sometimes people call it the Labrador Current. And then you've got the southern waters come up and they meet at Cape Hatteras. And then going through all of this is the Gulf Stream waters. The Gulf Stream's very warm and blue. The other waters can also be very cloudy or very clear depending on what part of the water comes up in the Outer Banks. But what it really means is you've basically got three oceans that meet at Hatteras. And particularly on the Diamond Shoals, like Dave was just speaking about, you can see just about any ocean creature that's in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere very close to Cape Hatteras. And you can go a few miles the other direction and have completely different conditions. So here's some of the blue water I'm talking about. It's at the wreck of the Proteus, which is off of Ocracoke. It's just out that way. It's a ocean liner that collided with a steamship in 1918, having not really to do with World War I. It just happened to happen at the time. Here's some of the clear water I'm talking about. This is Captain Dave swimming up the prop shaft of the Proteus. And if you're looking behind him, this is what the diving here is all about. Big schools of baitfish, and if you look over him, probably about as high as those pipes there, just kind of hovering over the wreck. Hundreds of sand tiger sharks. And believe it or not, we've got people that just come here to see the sharks. This is the stern of the Proteus. It's got a huge prop, and sometimes the rudder is exposed, and sometimes it's buried under the sand. It used to stand up, but I think it was in 2012, that section of the wreck fell over. And it was kind of interesting because the guys who came out with us on the first trip, right under here, found the stern bell of the ship, which had been hidden for years. So when it fell over, it must have disturbed it. She's got a center engine, so she has a large prop shaft that goes through the whole ship, and it kind of comes together where lots of the ribs and framing of the hull have sort of fallen in, and it almost has an eerie look to it. We do a lot of spearfishing off of the coast here. This is Captain Rich looking for a big grouper on the Proteus, which that's some pretty advanced level spearfishing there, because if you look right up above him, you can see the sand tigers hiding up there. Proteus has got large boilers, like probably is 15, 20 feet tall. You'll notice that these are knocked over on their sides. They've been displaced and rolled because the furnaces are now kind of almost pointing up towards the surface. Her steam engine's knocked over, and the pistons lie on the port side of the wreck with the tops of the pistons pointing out towards the side of the hull. You have to really know what you're looking for, but all three of the compound steam cylinder pistons are on the side of the wreck. She draws all kinds of sea life, and here you see some jacks, just beautiful fish, lots of bait fish. Sometimes, like Hal was saying, you can't even see what's going on because the bait fish can get so thick on these wrecks. This is the steering quadrant. Right there is where they found the bell, just behind that. A steering quadrant is a big gear that's turned by a smaller gear that turns the rudder. You know, these massive rudders needed a lot of power, and it's driven by an auxiliary steam engine. There's lots of tropical fish on these wrecks because the Gulf Stream water is really warm, and this is a queen angelfish here. And you can just get mesmerized by them down there. There's all kinds of different colorful fish. The Proteus is known for sharks, and sometimes you might be down there and you don't see any. What you need to do is look up. And this is a day on the Proteus. This was taken on the bottom, and that's 125 feet deep. You can see the dive boat up there. Now that's how clear the water can be. And then sometimes the sharks come in really close to you. And this is a shot I took off the side of the Proteus. And notice it's kind of hiding in the bait fish. They like to do that. Sometimes you'll see a school of bait fish coming towards you, and it looks kind of thick, and then you look in the center, and there's a shark in there. And they're tricky. So that's an example of some of the warm water Hatteras diving we have. And then we've got other kinds of diving on the Outer Banks. Near the shore on the northern part of the Outer Banks, there's a number of wrecks. As a matter of fact, I think there are as many as 21. Sometimes you can be in this green kind of water here, and it can be very cold. Other times, the Gulf Stream will actually push in on the northern Outer Banks, and you'll walk out on the beach and it'll look like you're in the Bahamas or something. And this is the wreck of the Huron here in some real nice blue water. But what was weird this day was the water was 61 degrees. Even though it was blue, it was very cold. This is another day in some blue water. And this is the stern post of the Huron. And these northern wrecks are often covered in juvenile spade fish. And what you might notice in this picture here, though, take a look at off to the side. Look at the watercolor. You've got Gulf Stream water on top. And it was 80 degrees. You slammed down into the green water and the visibility went dusty. And this next picture really shows all the silt. Well, if you're up here in this water, it's like 80 degrees. This water was 60. So you stick your hand through it and you're like, oh man, you gotta be kidding me. Those are the kind of conditions we get around here. Anything that happened in the ocean can pretty much happen off the Outer Banks. Here's a couple more pictures of the Huron. She wrecked in 1877 with a lot of loss of life. It was a United States Navy third-class gunboat. And a lot of changes happened right after the loss of the Metropolis and the Huron in the life-saving service because the loss of life let them know we weren't manning our life-saving stations enough months of the year. And the Huron was days away from full-time staffing in the winter when the wreck happened. And I think there was something like 98 lost souls on the Huron. And she's still there right off just to the north of Nag's Head Pier. And this is another wreck near Nag's Head Pier. This is called the Explorer. It's a steam tug. And this is the top of the triple expansion steam engine. She lies in probably 15 feet of water, 20 feet of water when she's exposed. When that sand builds up, sometimes it'll completely bury the wreck. I've been there and seen it only 8 feet deep, and you could not see anything of the wreck. And I mean, you're sitting in front of the right house, you're right out at the spot on the pier that you know it's at, and you can't see anything. That's how these wrecks are on the Outer Banks. The sand moves around a lot in places. This is some of the visibility you can get off the northern Outer Banks on a good summer day. This burrfish is hanging out on the wooden remains of the Explorer, and behind her are these spot. And you know, a lot of times you think of spot as being, you know, just something you'd catch fishing, but they're really beautiful fish underwater. And this is another picture taken on the stern of the Explorer with a school of spot going by. She's a tugboat. These are tow bits that are left. And of course, they're just broken off and gone because it was this wooden vessel. But what remains are the large iron parts and the very edges of the wooden hull where she sticks out. And you can see right there some wood exposed behind it. She was brand new when she ran aground. She hadn't even been used. She was being towed by one of her sister tugs that had been built in Savannah, Georgia, and they were on the way up to, I believe, Norfolk, and they were owned by the United States Emergency Fleet Corporation, and her sister tug made it, but they were towing the Explorer, so she didn't have any steam up at the time, so they lost her in, it was, I believe, 1919, right after World War I. Another wreck is the Carl Gerhardt here, which is at 2nd Street off of Kill Devil Hills. And she was a Swedish freighter, wrecked in 1929, I believe. She is probably the biggest shipwreck really close to shore on the northern Outer Banks, between the one she sits right next to, which is the Kozikos, which was originally the tanker Paraguay, which was Sun Oil Company's first tanker. And they lie right next to each other. You can literally swim from one to the other. And a lot of times in the summer, somebody will run a line so you can follow it. She's got the Carl Gerhardt has a pretty good sized triple expansion steam engine. Notice she's covered in something. What these are mussels. And they grow all over these wrecks in the Kill Devil Hills area. Whereas I don't see as many of them if you head down to Nag's Head. And the wrecks north of there don't seem to be covered in them. But you can literally scoop them up, throw them in a bag, and go boil them, and they're really good. This is the top of the steering quadrant of the Carl Gerhardt. And you'll notice all these fish around her. You've got a spade fish here and black sea bass. And you'll see a lot of tautogs on these wrecks and a lot of triggerfish. Whereas if you come down here past the Diamond Shoals, the fish you see on the nearshore wrecks are more warm water varieties. You don't see the tautogs as much. Sometimes you see the black sea bass. You see a lot more sheep's head down here. But you've got these three bodies of water, and they can kind of migrate around. So depends on what time of year you're diving these wrecks, but you can see all different kinds of fish. This is the steam winch on the stern of the Carl Gerhardt. Once again, covered in mussels. A lot of times you see this green sort of see-through algae tends to be on the wrecks up north. The wrecks near the shore up north have sort of a brown look to them most of the time. But sometimes when you're up there, you see different colors. This is the wreck of the Gerhardt again, and you see these juvenile spadefish. Now, you don't see the juveniles as much off Hatteras and Ocracoke. You see full-sized adult ones. When they're young, they have very defined stripes on them, almost like convict stripes. And these will be in schools and they'll be about this big, whereas the ones we see down here tend to be larger. I was telling you, though, that you see a lot of colors sometimes in the summer on these wrecks. This is the ship that's next to the Carl Gerhardt, the Kozikos. This is one of its steam boilers, like Hal was talking about on the Manuela. It has these, they're called Babcock and Wilcox boilers. This is one of those same tanks. Notice the red and yellow growth on that. As you go from the north to the south, you start to see more yellow growth on the wrecks until you get down to Diamond Shoals, where they actually are covered in these spongy yellow corals that are like really bright yellow. But you start to see the yellow growth more, starting somewhere around Kill Devil Hills. Whereas if you go to dive a wreck in Kerala, you're going to see more green growth on it. I don't know if this has changed over the years, and as the waters are getting warmer, I think it's going to change more. But from year to year, noticing the colors on the wrecks is really cool. This is the fallen over steam engine of the Kozikos. You'll notice, like I said, a lot of yellow growth on it. This is also a weird steam engine in that it's a quadruple expansion steam engine. The most common was a triple expansion, which was a high pressure, intermediate, and low pressure that the steam followed through. This one actually has 4 cylinders on it. And then on the machinery again, you'll notice that the fish swimming around here, which are spot, they kind of almost get a light red look to them underwater, which when you pull them out of the water on a fish hook, they don't have that. But as you dive, different filters are caused by the water above you that allow certain colors to come through, and then they seem to sort of go away as you get deep until when you get down to like 100 feet, you might not be able to see red at all. Red goes completely away. And it's pretty shocking when you see a red snapper underwater and then shine a light on it and it turns bright red, and then you take the light off of it and it's silver again. This is a condenser on the stern of the Kozikos. The Kozikos is broken up into 2 sections. The stern with the engine is very much further out to sea than the rest of the wrecks. So they call it the triangle wrecks because there's 3 pieces. And the stern of the Kozikos is actually the 3rd piece, but it's still part of the further south wreck. This is what they call the boiler wreck, is the Oriental at Pea Island. And this is on a nice clear day, and what sticks out is the top steam cylinder of the inverted steam engine like Dave was talking about. Underneath that, you've got these levers that drove accessory machinery, kind of almost like a seesaw, off the piston shaft. Look at these red colors that are on this wreck. For some reason, these shipwrecks near Pea Island kind of tend to have a red hue to them. There's another shipwreck that's further south that we identified last year. It's the Georgian Reed. We found it a couple years back. And I've never actually seen the wreck in visibility any better than this. But what we found was concrete bags like Dave was talking about on the Monahan. And the picture I have in my head of them was, I grabbed one and I was like, well, that's a concrete bag. Well, that's a concrete bag. And I was looking at them, and they had this red growth all over them. I was like looking this close to it, and I was like, and I'm going to stop now before I stick my finger somewhere I probably shouldn't. But the concrete bags were enough to identify the wreck. Here's another look at the Oriental's red growth, and look at all the fish coming through. These wrecks just draw life. So we dive some of these shallow wrecks up off the northern part of the Outer Banks quite frequently, and there's a couple of them off Ocracoke. And then the other part of Outer Banks shipwreck diving that is pretty interesting is we have clear Gulf Stream deep wrecks. And when I say deep, I'm talking, we've got a number in the 200-foot range. There's the Billy Mitchell fleet and the YP-389. that are in the 300-foot range, going all the way to how deep are you willing to go before you just say somebody's going to get killed. We've got wrecks in the 400-foot range. There's wrecks 700 foot. We fall away to deep water, very close to shore out here, off the point of the Diamond Shoals. So you can be in 100 feet of water and go another 2 miles that way and be in 500-600 feet. But some of the deeper wrecks we dive are really interesting. This is the E.M. Clark, which is a tanker that lies on its side. It lies on its port side, and because it's deeper, it's very intact. This is my friend Sean Harper shining lights on the very stern area here, and you can see the rudder and the prop here. And because these shipwrecks haven't fallen apart as much, they make you realize how big some of these ships were almost the second you get close enough to see them. This is the lifeboat davits of the Clark. You'll notice they're turned in. That boat obviously never got launched. That's if we do get a chance to dive it with an anchor line. That's usually where we try to tie in. We don't dive these wrecks much anymore with anchored in techniques. We pretty much get bomb dropped like paratroopers onto the wreck. The captain will pull the boat into the current, run it a while, then turn around, go with the current. Then you add up your speed going into the current, and you add up your speed going away with the current, and then you divide it by 2 and you get what the current is. And if it's much around a knot, we're not dropping an anchor. We drop the divers ahead of the wreck, and they descend down as fast as they can, try to hit the wreck. Then you can do your dive, and at the end of your dive, you want to try to stick together because you want to send a bag up, which you fill with air, let it go on a reel. And everybody, you want to leave the wreck as close to the same time as possible so you don't have a bunch of different bags around. That's how we dive these wrecks. The E.M. Clark has some holes where parts of the ship have fallen out here, and you can see this is a boiler right here that's fallen out of the ship sideways. The engine room of the Clark is something on the last 2 dives I've done there that is mind-boggling. This is the engine. If you picture the side of the ship, because the bottom of the hull is now on your right side, like that wall there. The engine is still attached to the bottom of the ship, and it sticks out, however tall it is, probably 30, 40 feet, and is just hanging there sideways. And when you go in, you're looking at the steam cylinder tops on the engine. And then the last dive I did there, I swam all the way to the back of the hull against what would be that wall, and I shot this picture here. These are the legs of the engine, and you can see the steam pipe coming into it there. Now notice right in the center, you got a lionfish. These things have taken over the warm water wrecks. They started off, I think Dave said the first one they saw was, 15 years ago on the Kashina? They have taken over the deep wrecks in particular because of the warm water. They like that warm water. 2 years ago, we saw one north of the Diamond Shoals on the wreck of the Cassandra Lulutis. They're just becoming more and more numerous as the water gets warmer. So even inside the wreck of the E.M. Clark, you've got lionfish. And there's one wreck we have called the Tarpon. It's a submarine, and it has very small hatch holes, and it's possible to go down inside it. And for years I'd been saying, I don't know if I want to go in that or not. And then I made up my mind one day. I was shining a light inside it, and I saw about 6 or 7 lionfish in there, and I was like, No, that's a very good reason not to go in there, because can you imagine silting out the wreck and then getting stung by a bunch of lionfish and then trying to get your way out of it? So I've decided against that. The stern of the Clark is probably one of the coolest sights in Hatteras diving, if you ever get a chance to dive it. You see where the hull plates have sort of broken away, and this is that round cleat at the back where it would have been a hawser where they would have put a tow rope through. Down here is the rudder. And what's kind of crazy about the Clark is it stands about 50 feet off the bottom. So you hit it, you're at about 190 feet, which in diving training, that's one zone. And you get down to the bottom, you can hit a washout as deep as 270 feet. And that takes an entirely different type of training. But it's one of those things where people start talking about, well, can you dive this or can you dive that? It's like, I don't know, what about the top or the bottom of it? What are you talking about? But this is the kind of diver equipment you're starting to see on this deep stuff. This guy's wearing a rebreather. These are bailout bottles in case something fails with his rebreather. But if his rebreather keeps working properly the whole dive, see that tiny little tank there? And there's one on the other side. You can stay down all day on those tiny tanks because they're being cleaned by this piece in the middle here, which is the scrubber, which is, I guess, submarine technology. That's how they keep the CO2 out of the air. And these guys are using scooters that they pull themselves along with. And Sean here is an unbelievably good videographer. He's got his scooter equipped with a camera and lighting systems, which I like to follow him around because he lights stuff up for me. I call him the sun. Sometimes he'll be like working. When I'm diving, all I'm paying attention to is my camera and my air. You know? And I'll be like, hey, it's getting lighter all of a sudden. That's Sean pulling up behind you with about $5,000 worth of underwater video lights. And another wreck we dive that's kind of deep is the Uss Monitor. And this is the bow. I think I had already had that in my other presentation. But here's Sean lighting up the scene. And I'll admit, these are Sean's lights that took this picture. You'll sort of notice some things in these pictures, though. This looks blue and white when you're down there. See these oranges and yellows and purples? You don't so much see them at 250 feet. It looks mostly like you're blue and white, but as soon as somebody lights it up, all these colors come out. And you'll see something on here that, look in the middle here. This is hard coral. The Monitor is closer north to where we are than some of the wrecks we dive down off of Ocracoke. And as you get closer north in the Outer Banks, you start seeing more hard coral growth. And it's really colorful sometimes. This is the armor belt of the Monitor here. You can see somebody else without a rebreather down around the edge there, letting bubbles off. It's getting to be to the point where I'm often the only person breathing off of old technology, open circuit scuba down there. They're breathing off rebreathers, and both systems have their pluses and minuses. But it's really getting to be more and more high tech out there. Here's some Diamond Shoals wrecks. Sand tigers can be seen from one end of the Outer Banks to the other. Now, there may be more in some places than others, but they are definitely very present on the Diamond Shoals. And you can see this guy's got his remoras cleaning, and see the little pilot fish type fish off in the corner. And if you look behind them, there's other sand tigers. They're just cruising out there on the sands of the Diamond Shoals. And like Dave was saying, it's fairly shallow up on the shoals themselves. This is another shot of the Weatherby's steam engine, and that's my brother-in-law and his son. And you can see here, this is the anchor line, and it's tied into the wrecks. Lots of times, most of the time when we're diving, we anchor in. Sometimes we'll drift dive, and on the Diamond Shoals, it's kind of crazy because like Dave was saying, there's very high current here. This shot shows the Weatherby's engine from the front. This is looking up. You see all the bait fish and the sun just over the top of this engine. And down here, you're seeing some larger spade fish. Like I was saying, you could see just about any kind of fish on the Outer Banks, especially on the shoals. This is amberjacks. People who fish will tell you they put up one hell of a fight. They call them reef donkeys. They can be so thick on these shipwrecks. And mind you, these fish are this big and this thick around sometimes. And they'll start doing circles, and you'll almost get vertigo from the amberjacks. And they're just amazingly large schooling fish. And then if you look down here, you've got these gag groupers, which are a favorite target for spear fishermen. And that they kind of hang out down in the lower part of the wreck. And they're also voracious predators, but they feed on different kinds of fish than the jacks do. And then back here, you look, you see some sheep's head. All these different fish kind of mingle together in different parts on the Outer Banks. But you're rarely going to see a real warm water fish in the same water that you're going to see like a tautog or something that likes cold water. This is the bow of the Hesperides. Notice the sand tigers cruising around the shipwreck. It's only 40 feet deep of water, but it's a very difficult dive because of the current most of the time. What you can see here is the bubbles rushing away from the divers, flying sideways because we're diving in probably over a knot of current there. The top of the steam engine here, you can see you've got lots of different kinds of semi-tropical fish living in this area. And even different kinds of fish up at the top of the wrecks than live at the bottom of the wrecks. You know, you may have these tropical, like, jack-type fish living on the top, whereas down at the bottom you're going to see stuff that likes to eat crustaceans and break up barnacles like sheep's head or oyster toads. Notice the yellow coral. It grows really thick on the shipwrecks near the Diamond Shoals. And there's also, I kind of think these wrecks almost have a purple look to them. This is a picture of that anchor. Notice the white hard corals here. Lots of them. And yellow spongy coral. You can squeeze this coral. It's like a sponge. That sort of stuff is almost unique to the Diamond Shoals in the amounts it grows. And as you go north, you're going to see more hard corals. As you go south, less of the hard corals, less of the spongy corals, and more sort of smaller stuff that grows on the shipwrecks. Here's an example of a sea creature that if you look at him and then look at this mast here, this is a fallen over shipwreck mast. This is a Goliath Grouper. That fish is 9 or 10 feet long. This is the biggest one I've ever seen. He lives on the northeastern and the Hesperides. That's an amberjack in the background. This guy is literally this tall, this wide, and I kid you not, he could literally swallow you if he wanted to. He's also one of the few that will let you get close to them because The smaller ones, I've noticed, tend to swim away from you, especially if you fire a strobe on your camera. So that's one of the few that I've ever gotten a good picture of. But they're all over the Outer Banks, especially in the warmer water. You can't hunt them. They're protected, but they can definitely be imposing. If they don't want you going somewhere, you're not going there. And I've seen that come into a play a couple times. This is the side of the Hesperides with which the one of the masts is fallen over. And you look into the background, notice the sand tiger's just cruising around, and then you see that anchor that Dave was pointing out earlier hanging off the side of the shipwreck. Take a note here. See that trench that's dug? That's dug by current. That's the thing about our shipwrecks. They may be warm and they may be tropical water, but they can be very difficult, especially because of current. And here's that picture of the stern of the Hesperides. That's my nephew swimming by it. Notice these black sea bass. They're very present on Outer Banks shipwrecks. It's kind of weird now. There used to be a lot of them that were big enough to spear. And these days, I'm noticing mostly smaller ones. This is the boiler of the Hesperides. The bow of the Hesperides, no, I'm sorry, the Northeastern. The bow of the Northeastern is very easy to go inside, and it's completely filled with hard corals. And I love this shot because you've got the light coming in from outside, and it kind of lights up these white corals almost like it's neon or something. And these shipwrecks are really good for natural light photography because they're only 20 or 30 feet deep where you're swimming most of the time, 40 feet to the sand. Whereas some of the deeper wrecks, you've got to light them up yourselves, otherwise you're operating in blue and white. That's the Northeastern steam engine with some jacks cruising by it. Lots left to the hull of the Northeastern. Notice all the sheep's head and spadefish real thick around the diamond shoals. That's the steering quadrant of the Northeastern. Here's one of my favorite fish species. That's a triggerfish right there. They seem to like water that's below maybe 75 degrees. Since I started diving on the Hatteras wrecks, they used to be plentiful on all the Ocracoke wrecks, and I used to hunt them all the time. But the water has gone from being mid-70s on the average to as high as we've seen 86 in the last few years. And the triggerfish have kind of migrated around the other side of the Diamond Shoals. So now if you go to a wreck that's up around the Diamond Shoals, such as the city of Atlanta or the Cassandra Lulutus, they're all up there now. And these species kind of move around to where they like to live. This is a pretty interesting shipwreck here. This is the stern of the Texaco oil tanker, Australia. And this flag here is a replica. This is a picture of the actual flag from the Australia. She was torpedoed in 1942 and went down just to the end of the Diamond Shoals in deeper water. She used to sit at about 110 feet when we used to dive her frequently. Last 3 or 4 seasons, she has been covered up. Where we used to look at the machine and we'd be in 110 feet of water and we'd be seeing all the wreck on the bottom. Nowadays, it's 85 feet deep there. So that's 25 feet of sand stacked on top of her. Used to be this was completely uncovered. If you start swimming down the sand dunes that is formed around the Australia, you get to these pieces of machinery. Just notice it's sticking out of a sand dune. And then I swam a little further down the sand dune to look for the bow of the wreck. And when you look back, that's what you see. you've got a trough at the bottom, 25 feet of sand, and the machinery sticking out of it. And notice this big amberjack here hiding in the current, because the current's smoking across the top of the sand dune. And you can swim all around down at the bottom, but if you get up at the top, it starts trying to blow you back. So I went down the sand dune and was going to see if I could find the bow, but she was completely covered up. So that vessel was huge. It's like close to 500, if not longer than 500 feet long. Great big tanker, completely buried in the sand by the Outer Banks. And you know what? We might go out there this year, and she'll be completely exposed, and that sand dune will be somewhere else. But when you cross around to the other side of the Diamond Shoals and get down off Ocracoke, headed towards Morehead City, you just start seeing different kinds of stuff on the shipwrecks. This is the British Splendors engine room entrance. And what you're looking at here is the end of a generator that would have been connected to the engine that generated power for the ship. Notice all the growth here has more of a purple and green look to it. And you're getting into more frequently warm all year round water down there, because this is kind of out in the Gulf Stream off Ocracoke. Notice the red snapper up at the top of the picture. See how this one's silver? That's probably because my light from my strobe wasn't hitting it as good. But look how they popped and turned red. And all this purple stuff doesn't look purple until you shine a light on it. And you can go in the engine room still of the British Splendor. And like I was saying before, you'll notice what's in there? Lionfish. And they're very prevalent on that wreck. This is a wreck of a diesel-driven vessel, and this is the signature of it. This is the crankshaft here. She's fallen out of the side. And in this picture, you can actually see where the crankshaft lies, falling out of the side, out of the stern of the upside-down ship. Now, this is probably my favorite example of the visibility we get off of Ocracoke and Hatteras sometimes. I took this picture from the bottom of the boat. That's 100 feet of water there. And that day, we pulled up over the wreck, and I was getting ready to throw the anchor in, and Dave was like, "You ready to go?" I'm like, "Hang on, look over the side of the boat." We could see the wreck from in the boat, and it sits at 100 feet. This was almost unlimited visibility. And that's what you get sometimes off of Hatteras when you get lucky. Here's another shot in the engine room of a red snapper. And these are the bait fish. They're called tomtates that often surround the ship. And like I was saying, sometimes you can't even see through them. This is another wreck here coming up that Hal covered. This is the Manuela. You're looking at the bow of the Manuela. And you can see all the machinery back there in the anchor chain. This is one of the Babcock and Wilcox spoilers. And here's something to notice. Look at that fish there. These tropical fish are just covering these wrecks. And it's kind of a shame because the lionfish eat those fish, and they eat the young of those fish. And there's getting to be less of these kinds of fish and more of the lionfish, but there's still a lot of them out there. This wreck's in about 160 feet of water, very clear, probably past Ocracoke, more like sitting off Portsmouth Island. She sits on her side, and this is looking down the hull, and you can see where the ribs of the hull allow you to go inside it. Here's a lionfish on the inside of the wreck. This is a piece of engine machinery. She has a steam turbine engine, and the engine pieces are still inside the engine room. Somehow the boilers fell to the outside of the wreck. I think that meant that the wreck kind of tilted over and stuff fell out of it as it was going down, because the torpedo hole just happened to be in the same area as the boilers. which was no mistake. That's where the Germans aimed their torpedoes, right at the stack of the ship. And you often read accounts of what happened on these ships, and the one place you probably, in retrospect, wouldn't have wanted to be was engine room crew, because you always read 2 oilers were killed instantly. Two boiler room crewmen were killed instantly. It's because that's where they aimed at. They aimed at the stack. So it's no mistake that the Manuela's boilers have fallen to the outside of the ship, but the heavier material, like the engines, sort of stayed inside. It's a really cool wreck, though, because you've got lots of natural light coming in from outside, but the inside of the wreck, if you're looking in, it's very dark, but very lit up from outside. And it's not really as scary to go inside those kind of wrecks where you can see the way to outside as some of the ones where you're actually inside the shipwreck. Manuela is a really nice wreck. This is one of our most popular shipwrecks, the Dixie era, made famous by sand tiger sharks all over and tons of bait fish. Like Hal and Dave were saying, the bow has collapsed a lot over the years, but it still stands kind of tall, and it's definitely one of my favorite places to go check out. The steam engine stands real tall. This is the top of it, and you can see the bait fish. They're almost swimming around as if they're all one organism sometimes. You see them making this big curve around it, and you can kind of go, hey, and make them bounce off this way and go, hey, and make them bounce off that way like you're the director of some sort of underwater orchestra. Dixie Aero's steam engine is a little bit weird in that high pressure cylinder is at the front, the intermediate is at the rear, and the low pressure is in the center. They were laid out many different kinds of ways, but take a look at all the green growth. That's like stuff you see off of Ocracoke. That's stuff you see down in the warmer water. Compare that with this. This is the wreck of the Mexicano, which is getting close to the Virginia border, and it's in about 150 feet of water. You notice it's covered with white and pink and yellow corals. And these gigantic tautags, biggest ones I've ever seen, they're about this big, all over this wreck. And she's a northern Outer Banks wreck. Very weird. When you're diving and you're deciding what gear to put on, like how cold's it gonna be, this wreck is very interesting because the top water the day we went there was blue, clear, and 80 degrees. And it was 51 degrees on the bottom. And the break, when you came up on it, was green. And you could see heat dissipating around the edge of the break. And it turned green to blue in 1 foot. So you stuck your hand through it and you're like, whoa. That's Outer Banks diving. All these different bodies of water meeting. Here's another Outer Banks northern wreck. Notice all the yellows and oranges and greens. Different kinds of wrecks, covered with hard coral. And then there's this one. This is the Lansing. She sits kind of right out, sort of near the Diamond Shoals in deeper water. And you'll notice she's kind of got all of them going on. She's got the greenish southern wreck kind of growth up here. And then down here, the hard corals. And I don't know how long her rudder's going to continue holding on, but it's down to its last pintle and kind of hanging out. She has this giant prop shack. It's just unbelievable looking wreck upside down. This is on the wreck of the San Delfino. This is a deck gun, which Roger was telling me here, he was the one who recovered the aiming device off the back of the deck gun, which actually was a big part in identifying these ships. This just shows you what the world was like in the 40s off of the Outer Banks. This was on there to protect that ship from German submarines. Didn't do a very great job. They got it anyway. This is in the stern, sort of just behind where the engine room would have been. And you notice all these red fish here, different yellows and oranges inside the wrecks. Very interesting area because right there, it's far enough out to get Gulf Stream, it's far enough in to get northern Outer Banks water, and even on the right days, it probably gets some of the southern water. This is the wreck of the Merak, which is just to the south of the light tower off of Diamond Shoals. And it's a really interesting area, covered in amberjacks. And it's also upside down. You notice this big prop. Now here's a deep water, very far south wreck. Different types of fish. You've got these jackknives here that are all over the wreck. And look at the purple growth. This is my brother-in-law swimming over the wreck of the FW Abrams. This is the blown-up steam engine of the FW Abrams. Half of the steam cylinders still sticking straight up. The cylinders have been blown away from the sides. Has the 3 boilers. It was a sister ship of the Dixie Arrow in a row. Typical World War II tanker wreck. Covered in sand tigers. And sometimes this green algae grows on it during the start of the season. This is the stern of the submarine USS Tarpon. And notice the copper hues of copper pipes, and then you've got stainless steel pieces, which were on United States submarines. This one wrecked it went down in 1957 on the way to being scrapped. Notice the colors. This is a hydraulic manifold that controlled all the gear, the power to the gear on the bow. Lots of purple hues on these wrecks. I'm always fascinated by the different colors you see when you come back the next year. You can see this is the torpedo loading hatch on the Tarpon. I believe it's for the bow. And this is the inside of the pressure hull. The outside has rusted away, but a lot of this was made of stainless steel, so it's still intact. On the bow, you've got the torpedo doors. And look, lots of shiny stainless steel gear that was on these shipwrecks. That stuff will be there hundreds of years from now. She's known for her sand tiger sharks, and sometimes they'll be cruising around the wreck, almost like a racetrack, just hundreds of them. Here's the stern of the Dixie Arrow. Notice the big rudder post there. And there's that piece that we were looking at earlier with how I believe it's a spare crankshaft piece for inside the engine, because that would be something that if it broke and you were halfway across the ocean, it would be good to have a spare, because it's going to take months for somebody to make that for you. Now here's an example of the adult spade fish that get really big. And notice that the bigger ones have lost their stripes, whereas the other ones that you see almost look like a convict fish. This is the bow of the steam tug Kashina, which sits right on out there, and about 11 miles out. She hit a mine in the Hatteras minefield while assisting another vessel, and we dive that a lot. It's a really beautiful mix of different kinds of fish and different colors because it sits kind of close inshore, and sometimes it's real warm, and then sometimes you get the darker, greener waters. And then here's a picture of a couple of the tropicals that we see out off of Hatteras, and I just find it really cool when you're out there and you're looking at fish that people put in their aquarium in their natural environment. And that's what we have a lot of out there. But anyway, that's what I've got for you. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.